So first of all, just a little bit about the use of helium. Helium is used primarily for upper airway obstruction. So upper airway tumors, asthma, particularly up, when it's involving the upper airways. Because why? Because helium is a lower density gas. It has more laminar flow. So patients, the work of breathing is often reduced by putting patients on Heox. So backing up a little bit, if we can pretend just for a minute that the ventilator is on 40% oxygen, I got it set at 40, not 100. And I came up to you and I said, and it's just O2 and air, I'm not, forget about helium right now. And I said, okay, the patient's on 40% oxygen. Can you tell me how much nitrogen the patient's getting? What would you say?
40% oxygen. How much nitrogen?
Right. 60%, right. And it's rare that I get an answer that quick. It's usually one of two. It's like, wow, I haven't done that calculation since I've been in school, or I have no idea, nitrogen, where do you get nitrogen from? So then I say, all right, we're on 40% oxygen, and then I point out, I pick up these two hoses here, the O2, let me do it this way. So I go, okay, these two hoses are hooked to the ventilator. What's in this hose? 100% oxygen, right? What's in this hose? People say, well, air. And I go, okay, what's in air? And they go, well, 21% oxygen. I go, okay, what else? And believe it or not, some people don't really know. I find that pretty weird. But eventually some people, say, well, it's 21% or 20.9% oxygen and 78.9% nitrogen. So I say, okay, basically you have 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen running in this hose. So between these two hoses, you have two gases, oxygen and nitrogen, right? And then I say, if one of those is oxygen, what has to be the other one? Nitrogen, right? So then they go, oh. So I say, all right, if 40%, now if I turn this and I turn the FiO2 to 30%, now how much nitrogen are we delivering to the patient? Well, 30%. And then people get it. So if I turn it to 50% oxygen, how much nitrogen? 50%. So what you're doing is the ventilator is blending 100% oxygen with a mixture of 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen. Now, if we're using it on a patient this way and it's on 40%, the patient's getting ventilated, but he has an upper airway obstruction or something, and you want to try to improve or decrease his work of breathing. So the way to do that would be to change the carrier gas that you're using to carry the oxygen into your patient. Because nitrogen, although we're breathing at 21%, we're breathing 80% nitrogen. Nitrogen does not do anything to us. We breathe it in, we breathe it out. It achieves equilibrium with our blood and everything else, but it's in total inert gas. So, but the problem is the combination of oxygen and nitrogen has a certain density to it. And so in essence, if this is oxygen and this is nitrogen, nitrogen is just being the carrier gas to carry the oxygen in that we need to live, right? And then we use a little bit of the oxygen that we breathe in, and then we exhale 18% of the nitrogen or the oxygen out. But the nitrogen goes in and out unchanged. It's still the same concentration. So what we're doing with Heox is we're simply taking the nitrogen away and replacing it with helium. And so helium is an inert gas as well. And being an inert gas, we breathe it in and breathe it out, but the combination of helium and oxygen is less dense than that of oxygen and nitrogen, so it's easier to breathe in and out. And that's why we use a mixture of, we call it Heox. And so to use Heox, historically, when we talk about the use of Heox historically, it wasn't used with ventilators. It was just used with, say, a partial rebreather or non-rebreather mask. So the patient comes in, he's asthmatic, we go, gee, he's having a real hard time breathing. What if we had him breathe a mixture of Heox? And they go, maybe he would be able to breathe easier. So you run down to the tank room and you get a tank of 70-30, okay, 70-30. And so why do you get 70-30? Well, we still need to deliver, you know, a little bit more oxygen than 21%, so we need 30%, but the balance would be, you know, helium at 70%. So you put the mask on him at 70-30, and he's breathing that, and you do a blood gas, and his PO2 is like 60. And you go, geez, his PO2 is a little low. Do we have a tank of 60-40 in the tank room? 60% helium and 40% oxygen. They go, well, yeah, I think we have one of those. So you get and put 60-40 on, and now his PaO2 goes up to 75, so you're a little bit better. So the confusion with the use of Heox came in from, you know, you had two different mixtures in your tank room, 60-40 or 70-30. So then the guy gets really bad. He, you know, CO2 goes up. He, you know, and he said, we got to intubate this guy and put him on a ventilator. So when we put him on a ventilator, is there some way that you guys can hook up helium and run through the ventilator? Well, yeah, I'm a pretty crafty respiratory therapist. Maybe I can figure out how to do it. So what they would do is they would disconnect the air hose and plug the air hose into a 70-30 tank, because that's all they had, right? So if you're running 70% helium and 30% oxygen into this yellow hose, the ventilator expects to see 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen. It doesn't really care whether it's nitrogen or helium. It just expects and cares that it's an 80-20 blend, right? So when it sees a 30-70 blend, when you set your FiO2 at, let's say, 40%, what FiO2 is it going to read here? It's going to read higher because you've already delivered, in addition to the 100% here, an additional 9% oxygen through here because it's a 70-30 blend. So initially, you're going to get an O2 alarm go off on the ventilator. Secondly, because of the different density, you're going to get volume fluctuations because the measurement system in any one particular ventilator is designed to measure the density of O2 and nitrogen, which is a certain density, not O2 and helium. So as a result, the posted, even though there's no leaks or anything, what you would generally see is your exhale tidal volume be lower than it actually is being delivered to your patient. In reality, we'd be delivering 400 and exhaling 400, but in some cases with Heox, you might see 200 cc's coming back and you go, oh my goodness, we got a leak. But you don't have really a leak, it's just that the measurement system is posting an erroneous number. So we basically have just those two issues when it comes to, you know, using Heox with a ventilator. So then somebody got the bright idea and said, well, wait a minute, what if we use a Heox mixture of 80-20? That way it's as close to the nitrogen and oxygen concentration. So when you use that, the FiO2, when you set it at 30%, is going to read 30%, because the ventilator doesn't particularly care about the density of gas in terms of, it just says, I'm going to deliver so much of this and so much of this to equal that proportion of gas to give you 40% oxygen, or whatever percentage you want. So we make the O2 alarm go away. But once again, we still have the problem with the accuracy of the tidal volume. So what hospitals did when they, before ventilators had this particular feature on it, what they would do is develop a kind of a cheat sheet, if you will, saying when using the servo I ventilator, you have to adjust the exhaled tidal volume by 1.5. And if you did that, and if it was the same as the inhaled tidal volume, then you didn't have any leaks. But if you multiplied the 200 cc's times 1.5 and it didn't equal the inspiratory tidal volume, then you had a leak. And it wasn't the density issue that was causing that difference, it was an actual leak. So there was this jury rigging that you had to do, and some hospitals even had a little chart when using Heox to do it. So because of all that, you know, hospitals said, oh God, do we really have to use helium? It's such a pain, I gotta go to the tank room, and plus we gotta find the right adapters and so on and so forth and all that, and plus it's confusing. Because it was confusing because people were still thinking, well, how can we get a 70-30 blend if we're using an 80-20 tank? How can we get a 60-40 blend if we're using an 80-20 tank? Well, the ventilator will take care of that for you, right? So what McKay did, they said, all right, well, let's make a ventilator that has the capability of doing helium.